What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. It is officially June 1st today. Best ball drafts are in full swing. We are days away from getting Scott Fishbowl scoring. Basically, it's redraft season. However, we're going to send Dynasty off with a great farewell. We are going to do one last Superflex draft. We have a great guest when it comes to Dynasty. Let's get into it. What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, it's Saturday morning. We're Dynasty drafting. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good. We've been doing all these startups and I haven't done like a real startup in a year. And so it's like the one way that I'm getting to try this out, but it's been making me want to get into a new Dynasty league, which, it always happens. Every year you're like, I'm not doing any more leagues. And then suddenly you just get the itch and you're like, I need a new one.
I picked up an orphan, but I also haven't done a startup, which is so funny because the very last question of today's show, spoiler alert, is who are you guys looking for at the end of your startups? And it occurred to me, Austin, that you and I probably haven't done any startups. So Jayson, you might have to carry us on that show. And in case you haven't picked up on it yet, our guest, Jayson Snyder from Dynasty Nerds. More on that in just a second. But Jayson, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you guys once again.
Yeah, Jayson, I say we had you
on Saturday morning.
Show. Yeah,
oh, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Jayson, talk about a little bit what kind of work you do with Dynasty Nerds and what kind of work people can follow you on Twitter, all that kind of fun stuff. I like to get that away at the start of the show. So.
Sure, you can see my handle there for Twitter in my line underneath my name there, and I'm senior writer over at Dynasty Nerds. Put out mostly written content. I do guest appearances, as you can see, on podcasts, but I don't have my own show. I'm primarily focused with my content on the written material. So that's where you
Jayson
can find me.
I have been in the industry for a similar amount of time, and we commented a month ago that we were shocked we've never run into the same circle, right. But now I had to have you back not even a month later. So.
That's good. We're catching up for lost time.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I do want to point out how fitting that Jayson is with Dynasty Nerds, because in case you haven't noticed the ticker at the bottom of the screen, we have partnered with Dynasty Nerds. The core mission at Dynasty Nerds is to grow the game of Dynasty fantasy football, and we want to help them and also help you save some money. So Dynasty Nerds is the longest standing Dynasty brand. They have a ton of tools to help you get better as a Dynasty manager. That includes the Nerd Film Room and all 22 film of all the incoming rookies, plus access to a trade calculator, and of course, mock drafts. This show's all about mock drafts. You can get Dynasty specific mock drafts over with Dynasty Nerds. So if you head to dynastynerds.com or download their app and use the promo code Club Fantasy, all one word, you are going to get 15% off of your subscription. You are going to dominate your league mates. You are going to become a better Dynasty manager. You're going to build your own actual Dynasty. Use promo code Club Fantasy, and there's a ticker at the bottom of the screen to remind you. Guys, let's go ahead and get the draft up. So, as previously mentioned, we are going to do our last startup draft of the season. That is not the right layout. So is it this one? It's that one. We are going to do our last Dynasty startup, and we're going to end with Superflex. I went 10 because I'm going to be perfectly honest. We've had trouble filling these things up lately. You guys are in the throes of summer and just don't want to come draft with us right now. But you know what? 10 people in a Superflex makes a hell of a lot more sense than 10 people in a 1 QB, which we talked about last week. So it is a standard Superflex Dynasty. That means 2 QBs. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to go ahead and get the draft started and let you guys know who we're drafting with. So Say Watt again is at the 1 slot. I don't expect him to be an auto drafter. He runs a bunch of his own mock drafts. So Say Watt again at 1, Maisie at 2. T King, I think, is a new one to draft with us at 3. Bro Cal at 4. HoovTube, our good buddy with Club Fantasy. And is it Optimus Fantasy they just started? I should have known that right now. But anyway, HoovTube at 5, Odunze at 6. Austin took the 7 spot. Duarte at 8. Wilson at 9. Wilson's new with us. And Jayson spied 78 at the 10 spot. Jayson, let's get into the nitty gritty of Superflex. There are some people watching the show who probably have no idea what Superflex is, or they haven't tried Superflex. So can you, in a nutshell, explain Superflex fantasy football?
Sure, absolutely. The elevator pitch, as it were, for Superflex is that often in single QB leagues, the value of the quarterback gets washed out. You just mentioned redraft. Oftentimes, the savvy redraft drafter is going to be picking a quarterback 7th, 8th, 9th round. It's not considered a premier position. You're more looking at the running backs and the receivers early on. The idea of Superflex is that you create a flex position whereby you can substitute in an additional quarterback. So you can get up to 2 quarterbacks in your starting lineup. Generally, quarterbacks score fairly well, and they score consistently well, which is the important note there. You might get higher scores from a receiver from week to week, but there's a lot more variation. Quarterbacks, just because they're always got their hands on the ball, are having that opportunity to contribute on the score sheet. So the idea of Superflex is to just kind of up the value of that quarterback by making 2, an option for your lineup. And it's been a popular format, I would say, for a couple of years now. It certainly has been a trend, but it's kind of it's the equivalent of the tight end premium, which has been created to kind of goose that tight end value. The Superflex kind of does the same thing for a quarterback.
And if you followed our show for any time in period, you know that Austin and I hate tight end premiums. So we don't think that it actually solves the problem, but that's a story for another day. We'll have some tight end premium redraft coming up. Jayson, do you prefer Superflex? There are a lot of, I'm going to call snobs, elitists out there that think Dynasty should only be played Superflex. And while we do not league shame here, last week we did a 10 team with 1 quarterback, and it was the most ridiculously horrible draft I've ever seen when it comes to quarterback value. The last pick of the draft, Jayson, was Trevor Lawrence in a Dynasty startup.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's bonkers.
Yeah. And so that's what it really was, the indictment to never do 1 QB.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on, should all dynasties be considering switch to Superflex? Is there a cutoff point?
I guess for me, I hesitate to make an across the board declaration to say everything should be X or everything should be Y. The reason I say that is you have to consider other factors. For example, how many teams are in your league? If you're running a 16-team league, then single quarterback is probably your way to go, because it's going to be hard for 16 teams to double up on a quarterback. Now, but if, as you just mentioned, if you're running a 10-team league, I do think it's a preferable format for me. I do like that it kind of evens out the values of the positions respectively.
No, I really like that. Austin, I've asked you that question a million times. I am going to throw a couple of quick things out here before I let Austin talk about Superflex a little bit. One, in this Dynasty startup, we only run 15 rounds. A true Dynasty startup is going to be closer to 20 to 25 rounds. We want to make sure the show only takes an hour of your time, so we are only running 15 rounds. Secondly, I put 3rd round reversal back in here, and part of my feeling on this was I did not do it last week, because in a single QB, I don't think it's that necessary. In a Superflex, I think it is very necessary, because the guy who picks 101 and gets Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, one of those guys, I think is at a distinct advantage versus the guy who picks 110, 112. So I did put 3rd round reversal back into this draft. My final point is, if you were tuning into the show to have us grade every single team in the draft, it's not going to happen. Plain and simple. That is not the point of this show. The point of this show is to educate you guys about fantasy football, to educate you guys about Dynasty, Superflex, and to look for interesting trends when it comes to drafting. This is about using mock drafts to get better. At the end of the draft, Jayson and Austin will break down their drafts and explain their thought process behind their picks. I'm going to pick on somebody, and all in good fun, and tell you what I think the worst pick of the draft was. But that's as far as we're going to go when it comes to grading teams. That's just not what this show is about. We'd love to have you keep viewing with us. We do these shows every single week, and I promise you, you are going to learn something. Austin, back to Superflex. We've kind of talked about whether you prefer it or not, and I think you and I have similar ideas when it comes to league size being the most important factor. You can talk about that if you want, but my true question to you is 3 quarterbacks on a Dynasty Superflex roster required? Should you be going in thinking you have to start 2 quarterbacks every single week?
I think you should definitely make that your goal, because I think it's going to give you the biggest advantage in your fantasy league, just because quarterbacks, they tend to score the most points by the nature of how much they're touching the ball and how important they are to the overall offense. Do I think it is absolutely essential? Not necessarily. It kind of depends on your roster build and who you have. Like if you've gotten some elite talent at the receiver position and you can have them in that flex spot, that can work. But it really depends on your roster build. I want to have 2 quarterbacks starting every week. And then for my bye week, maybe then I'll be fine with having a quarterback and a different positional player. But in general, like I want to maximize my odds of 2 quarterbacks every week.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Jayson, how do you feel about that same situation? One of the players that I've said, at least in redraft, Dynasty kind of changes it a little bit because quarterbacks are so hard to come by. In redraft, like if you have Christian McCaffrey, I'm fine with just considering him my second quarterback just because of how many points he scores every week.
Yeah.
But Jayson, do you go in for me, I'll be honest. When I see Superflex, I know I'm walking out of my first 4 rounds with 2 quarterbacks. I have to. So do you go in with that same mindset?
Yes, I do. I'll also be honest, and I don't have to really tell you that I'm being honest because you can look at the draft board and see I've already taken 2 quarterbacks, so I've kind of played my cards there a little bit. But yeah, I definitely think it's important, especially when you talk about a dynasty format and a focus on a dynasty format. Just because of now with the Superflex, as I explained it earlier, the relative value of that position. If you can get that third one and it's even a half decent player, you've got some decent trade capital to talk to, your neighbors and your league mates about, which is very important going forward. You find yourself looking a little lean or not competitive. Now you've got that third person to deal, or that third quarterback to deal with, and you can still have 2 solid quarterbacks in your starting lineup every week.
I'm going to jump to a user question. Kel Rich just asked on YouTube, could we do a 14-team startup next week? And Kel, I hate to break it to you, we're not doing any more startups this season. We're moving into redraft. There will be 14-team redrafts. I can tell you that because I play in 14-team redrafts. And if you've not watched this show, the whole point of this show is to help me get better at fantasy football. I bring these really smart people on so that I can steal their ideas and be better than everybody else that I play fantasy football with. So we will do some 14-team redrafts. I'll even try to get it in for you next week. But I want to actually ask you guys a question about a huge league, a 14-team dynasty. And to throw a wrinkle into the situation, let's call it Superflex. Austin, how insane is the quarterback value once you get past 12 teams in a Superflex?
It's pretty freaking wild. I did a 16-team Dynasty Superflex league one time, and that was quite the time. There was definitely like a world where you were going to only have 1 quarterback starting in any given week just because of the drop-off that happens at the quarterback position. The thing that becomes really challenging is I think it becomes even more important to get your quarterbacks during the draft because the waiver wire options are so limited in a team like that, in a league like that. Like you're basically waiting on injuries to happen and backups to come in or people to lose their jobs to have anybody on the waivers. So you really, I feel like quarterbacks become at a premium once you get beyond that 12-team league in a super flex setting.
Jayson, same question basically, but I'm going to ask you a question to follow up on it. You started this draft with 2 quarterbacks, and you were actually one of 4 teams to do 2 quarterbacks to start. Mm-hmm. In an enormous league, would you consider just cornering the market on quarterbacks and just keep drafting them just for the trade bait? Because Scott Fish, we had on one of our dynasty shows about 4 years ago, mentioned the cheapest quarterbacks will ever be is at your draft. Is there a bully quarterback strategy where you don't care about how bad your team might look later as long as you have the trade value?
I mean, I think that there's some value to that philosophy. I generally don't like to come out of a draft with feeling like I have work to do. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I like to have a roster that I feel like I can work with. There may be some tweaks I want to make, but I don't want to come out of a draft with 4 or 5 quarterbacks and no starting running back, and some people are comfortable with that. I just like to have the solid foundation when I walk out. And I mean, a lot of people, when you're an analyst in a dynasty, market, a lot of people will say to me, what's the best strategy to go into a draft with? And I'm always like, you have to kind of be water. You know what I mean? Like whatever draft you're in, you have to zig when everybody else is, you can't go in and say, I'm going to get 5 quarterbacks. If they fall to you, like you just said, that example of your draft that you ran last week where Trevor Lawrence is hanging around that late in a draft.
Yeah.
Jump on it every time. But don't go into it saying by the 7th round, I got to have 3 or 4 quarterbacks. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not reacting and living in the moment in a draft versus trying to shoehorn in some kind of preconceived strategy.
I've been sharing this story for a while now, but I think it's worth the users or the listeners hearing it. Is I am a person who in Dynasty has always been the trade up guy, specifically Superflex dynasties. I want to make sure that I have the early picks and that I am walking away with 2 quarterbacks. But I did a Dynasty startup last year where I got offered a pretty decent deal to trade out of my 3rd pick. And I took it and I acquired a 1st-round pick. And then people just started asking me for my 4th pick, my 5th pick, and kept sending me firsts. And the way that team turned out, I fell in love with. So where Jason's point was be water, don't just think about that when it comes to draft makeup, who you plan on walking out of the draft with. And Kel brings up, they would draft at least 3 or 4 quarterbacks, certainly, but it's about how early you're going to take them. Wait and see what falls to you. But also, don't be afraid to try something new in a dynasty league. It might suck if you suck for a few years, but I had all these first round picks this year, and that was the only league where I was able to walk away with Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr., which was my goal of the entire offseason, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't done what I did the year before, and I still made the playoffs the year before. Jayson mentions he doesn't like to walk out of a draft with work to do. Neither do I, and it worried me, but things just kind of worked out. So make sure you do your homework. Make sure you're looking at these mock drafts, and I think it could work out for you as well. Again, for anybody new to this show, the draft kind of goes on in the background. I'll start asking these guys specific questions about the draft here soon. I will recap the first 3 rounds to see if there were any interesting picks for everybody. But before I get into any sort of recap, anything like that, and we're going to talk about some specific players, I want to let Killa Quicks know. I see your question on Twitch. That is a great question for later on in the show. So I'm going to make you stick around for the full hour to talk about any late quarterback value. I will definitely get that. He said it's a redraft question, but I promise you I'm still going to get that in there. And no Hoove, I don't do tight end premium drafts because 1, we hate tight end premium drafts here. And 2, there's no setting for it on Sleeper. So if you have to expect that every drafter is remembering that it's tight end premium, because the ADP should change, but it doesn't change. But then me and Austin think it shouldn't change anyway. But we're going to get into that later. So Killa Quicks, to get back to you, I'm going to get your question at the end of the show. And they said they stick around the whole time. Guys, Anthony Richardson is the thumbnail because Josh understands that Anthony Richardson is the big important piece in fantasy football right now. And I am struggling with the value of Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray when it comes to redraft. And Austin and I will have a lot of fights, I'm sure, about Kyler Murray. Austin, I made the joke a few weeks ago or Wednesday where you weren't on a show with me that you, during the NFL draft, I told you where Kyler Murray fell in my rankings and you're like, you need to fix your process. So clearly you and I have disagreements on Kyler Murray. But this is Dynasty, and these guys are young, and that gets more interesting for me. So I actually wanted to look at ADP and play a game of Would You Rather. That is something we normally do on our Wednesday show. And this might be the first time I've done it on Mock It Like It's Hot in at least a year. But their ADP is very interesting to me when it comes to Dynasty. So Anthony Richardson is coming as the 7th quarterback off the board. And then Kyler falls all the way to the 11th. But I want to start with Richardson and talk about the guys that are coming after him. So you guys can answer this for as long or as short as you want. But I want to look at Anthony Richardson versus Caleb Williams. Anthony Richardson was obviously a very impactful rookie. He is going 1 pick basically ahead of Caleb Williams. Would you rather have Anthony Richardson or Caleb Williams, Jayson?
I think for me, I like Richardson above Caleb Williams, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's going to be a popular feeling here, but I guess the reason for my opinion there is I like that Anthony Richardson, I know he had an injury and he was out for a long time, but he'll be through a full offseason. He's played in a full league in a system in the league. He's been coached by pros. I think that gives him a bit of a leg up in the immediate term. Caleb Williams could turn out to be an excellent quarterback in the future. But if you're looking for that like 1 to 2, 3 year window for Dynasty, give me a guy that's going to hit the ground running versus a guy that's got to still go through those growing pains a little bit like Richardson did last year.
Austin, I don't know that I've ever gotten your strong feelings on Anthony Richardson, though I've been talking about him a lot. And I know you were a fan of Caleb Williams. So where do you stand with these two guys?
Yeah, right now I'm honestly scrambling because I just got sniped, which is always a great time.
Which is why we mock draft, folks, because you need to understand what you're going to do if you get sniped on a 1-minute clock. So.
Yeah, exactly. At least it's not underdog where it's a 30-second clock and I'm really messed up. No, I would probably do Caleb Williams over Anthony Richardson right now in a dynasty startup, only because if I am drafting either one of those, I'm probably doing kind of a 3-year build strategy where I'm trying to win my league in 3 years and I'm betting on the upside of one of those two. And for me, if I want to pick between Anthony Richardson or Caleb Williams, I kind of want the unknown more than I do the uncertainty of the known in this situation, because with Anthony Richardson, what we know about him is he barely played 4 games due to injury. Caleb Williams, I'm like, well, it's kind of more of a clean slate there. So he could really just if he flops, cool. I get the first overall pick again next year. you just keep going and trying to execute on that 3-year win strategy. I probably am going with neither of them because I'm trying to lean into more win now type strategies and startups. But I would put Williams over Richardson. Also, like Caleb Williams, if he had been in last year's draft, he would have been the number 1 overall pick even then, ahead of Anthony Richardson. So I do think that as a prospect too, Caleb Williams I would have had him ranked higher than Richardson.
And then with Kyler Murray, Austin, the next 2 guys are interesting to me. So I'm not going to make you go full keep trade cut because I have a way better question for that later. But Kyler Murray is going off as QB 11. A full round later, you're getting Jayden Daniels as QB 12. And then a full round after that, you're getting Dak Prescott as QB 13. And their age gap is interesting because I believe Kyler's at the 26-ish range where Jayden Daniels is, 22 years old, and then Dak Prescott is 30 years old. So they're not even going in order of age. But Austin, how do you feel about these young guys? Would you rather have Kyler Murray than Jayden Daniels and Dak Prescott?
Yeah, I think I would definitely, yes. And that's part because of my strategy that I just discussed of like how I'm trying to go win now more often than not when I'm doing dynasty startups now. And so I do feel like Kyler Murray definitely ahead of Jayden Daniels feels better to me for a win now. It also kind of feels better to me for a win in 3-year strategy because as exciting, God damn, I just got stuck again. That one really hurt, actually. That was like my last quarterback I wanted. So anyways, I just lost my train of thought. I think Jayden Daniels feels also risky to me because of, again, the style of play. He takes a lot of hits, and maybe he won't do that in Washington. Maybe he'll learn how to get down in a safe manner and not take those big hits. But if I'm trying to win in 3 years, I kind of would rather take what I know about Kyler Murray than what could happen with Jayden Daniels. The interesting one there, I think, is Dak Prescott, who, yeah, he's 30, but this is kind of the age that quarterbacks hit their peak in many ways.
That's what I've been thinking. Like, I feel like he is so underrated. I don't even know if he's won in this draft yet. I haven't looked at the draft. He did. Third round ahead of Trevor Lawrence, who the dynasty community just hates now, but that's another thing. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I was going to say is he's kind of in his peak right now. And so you probably are going to get a few good years out of him until he hits that age 33, 34. So again, if you're trying to win now, I definitely see an argument for him over Jayden Daniels. There's sort of a case to be there made against for him over Kyler Murray. But to me, then it depends on your scoring settings. Like, do you have 6-point passing touchdowns or not? Frankly, is the question there. And if not, then I've taken Murray because he's going to get more rushing upside. If you have 6-point passing touchdown as your setting, then Dak Prescott starts to become more of a conversation.
And same question with you, Jayson. When we're looking at these players, you have this kind of new hotness in Jayden Daniels. You have Kyler Murray, who was supposed to be there, but has been rather disappointing, though it was injury. And then you have Dak Prescott, who has been anything but disappointing, but he's the oldest of the bunch. How would do you want Kyler Murray over those 2 guys?
Well, this is the part of the draft where you're going to make me give flowers to Dallas Cowboys as an Eagles fan, and that feels gross. But to be honest with you, I think Prescott is dramatically undervalued, kind of the same line of thought that you guys just were entertaining. And the reason I say that is CeeDee Lamb is constantly regarded as a top 3 receiver. And who do you think is throwing CeeDee Lamb the ball? So if you can't have it both ways. If CeeDee Lamb's going to be an elite receiver, Prescott has to be a top level quarterback. You can't say Prescott's trash, but CeeDee Lamb's great, because unless Prescott's out of the lineup and somebody else is throwing him the ball, he's got to at least have some proficiency. So that's where I kind of part ways with some of that groupthink where people don't want to give Dak Prescott the credit, because I feel like, like I said, you can't have a dichotomy where one guy is great, but the guy that's feeding him the ball is no good. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, we're pretending 30 is ancient, and that's just super interesting to me. Right. Like, I don't think we're quite there yet. As Austin put it, you can see quarterbacks hit their prime here. What's your take on Jayden Daniels? Neither one of you talked a ton about Jayden Daniels, so Jayson, I'll let you finish this up with Jayden Daniels. Could be Anthony Richardson. He's comped to Lamar Jackson with his rushing upside, which is greater than what we've seen from Kyler Murray and certainly greater than Dak Prescott. Should he possibly for 4-point touchdown leagues be ahead of all of those guys?
So what I'll say about him is I think there's a huge range of outcomes for him. I think he could go to Washington and be out of the league in 3 years. I think he could be a stud. He's got enough skill players around him that he could succeed. But it's a new coaching staff. It's an organization that hasn't been known for their exemplary performance as of late. So there's a lot of unknowns there, which make me uncomfortable a little bit with him, just because, like I said, there's a new staff, there's a new program, there's a lot of new things in Washington, and that could be great because holding on to the past there doesn't seem to be worthwhile. But by the same token, I don't know what to make of him because of that, because there are so many variables there where I'm more comfortable in a guy, like I just said, like Dak Prescott, where we know what they are at this point. I don't need to try to figure out what are the Cowboys going to be. I know they have an elite receiver. I know he's been a top 10 player consistently when he's not injured. So to me, that I tend to opt for the security of knowing what I'm dealing with versus the unknown.
Yeah, it's that old Family Guy meme is, do you want the proven player or the mystery box? Because, the mystery box could even be Dak Prescott.
Right.
Why not just take Dak Prescott? I do want to grab Hoove up on the screen here. Hoove says Caleb Williams is his Dynasty QB3. I know he just recently dropped his rankings on Optimus Fantasy. So if you're not following Hoove, that is his handle at HooveTube. And I believe Optimus Fantasy is just at Optimus Fantasy, a new site started by our buddy Nate Polvit. So make sure you're checking those out and you can see Hoove's rankings. And this is the point of the show, guys, where I want to do the draft recap. And so we are going to look at the first 3 rounds. This is the only recap of the draft I'm going to do this entire time, just so you guys can hear some of these picks. So it's a super flex draft. It's very quarterback heavy, which is going to lead me to my actual first question. But Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Josh Allen, who gets Caleb Williams as the QB5, Jalen Hurts, quarterbacks to start the draft, and then the big 3 at wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase. Jayson ends it with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert back-to-back quarterbacks. We slide into Amon-Ra St. Brown in the second round, Christian McCaffrey, Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson back-to-back, how fitting, Marvin Harrison, Jordan Love, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jaden Daniels, Chris Olave starts. Oh, no, I forgot. It's third round reversal. A.J. Brown starts round 3. Then Brock Purdy, Tyreek Hill, Bijan Robinson, which feels insanely low. Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, Malik Nabers, Jonathan Taylor, Dak Prescott getting a little respect in this draft in the third round. Chris Olave wraps up the third round. No big surprises here. Lots of quarterbacks. It's a super flex. Lots of wide receivers. It's Dynasty. A few running backs, though. Bijan Robinson going after Jahmyr Gibbs is definitely a take. Austin, I can't imagine how excited you were to have Bijan Robinson fall in your lap, but that is not the question that I want to ask. Austin, we have done these drafts for 2 months now, 3 months now. I don't know how many months now. I have never seen a situation where Sam Laporta is the 40th pick of the draft. Jayson, I normally wait until the end of the show to have you guys talk about your drafts, but how crazy did it feel to you to have Sam Laporta fall to you at the very end of the 4th round?
Very crazy. I kept checking the roster tab to make sure that tight ends were like required in this league in this format. And I'm like, I must be missing something. Why have a tight end not been selected yet? So I was stoked to grab Sam Laporta at the end of the 4th for sure.
And so you kind of made this statement clear. I'm going to ask you to clarify. Sam Laporta is your tight end 1 in Dynasty right now?
I would think so, yeah.
Is there any fear that we saw the best of Sam Laporta last year with a questionable wide receiver 2 situation in Detroit, or do you still think the sky is the limit?
I think that that's a legitimate concern. The reason I'll tell you I think he's the number 1 for Dynasty is there's an insulation with the year that he put up last year. So even if he were to go out and then see a step down or a regression this year, I still think you're going to get premium trade value from him. So it's really more, to me, I try to like disconnect the names and I just look at the commodities, and I think he's going to be a valuable commodity after this year, regardless of the season that he puts up. And I don't know that you can say that about some of the other competition at the top end of the tight end board.
Awesome. I'm going to have you talk about your tight end 1, but I also just want to point out, folks, Austin is a Falcons fan, and I don't think he could have dreamed that this draft was going to fall better his way to get Bijan and Kyle Pitts. And then, Austin, I know you're a Drake May guy, and he falls to you in the 6th round, so I can't wait to hear you talk about this draft. But I do want to talk about Is Laporta in Dynasty the tight end one? The names I've seen mentioned are Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, arguably still Travis Kelce. I've seen Brock Bowers jump up there for some people, though he hasn't played a snap yet. Is it Laporta for you?
It is Laporta for me. And I think, even if last year was his floor, like he was he was the tight end one. So that's great. Like you want to take him. And I am surprised to see him go to the 4th round because I don't see them using him any differently in this offense next year. Like maybe he's going to block some more because he started getting better at blocking as the season went, but I don't think that's actually going to impact his pass volume and his efficiency as much as you might think. So I feel great about it. And I don't really think they upgraded their wide receiver 2 situation that much. Like they're talking a big game about Jameson Williams coming back and he probably gets some deep shots, but I don't think that's going to impact Sam Laporta's game. I think that's actually going to enhance his game because Jameson Williams is an over the top, take the top off the defense type guy, which will give space for Sam Laporta to work underneath. So I feel fine with taking him as the tight end 1. And to me, like even if he falls to tight end 3 this year, like it's still worth that because you're going to have a perennial top 3 tight end for many years to come.
And along those lines, the tight ends have kind of went to ADP so far, Austin, which brings me to the next player I wanted to talk about. I didn't know this was going to be a heavy tight end show, but I was shocked with the Laporta, so it just kind of made sense. I want to move on to Mark Andrews, tight end 7. But at one point last year, the question was Kelce or Andrews as your tight end 1. Obviously, nobody saw the Laporta and Trey McBride breakout happening. We were hoping that we would get these young tight ends. But Mark Andrews is still, I believe, 28 years old off the top of my head, very much in his prime, tied to a quarterback that loves him, tied to a team with no true number 1 wide receiver. Are we fading Mark Andrews too hard right now, Austin, as the tight end 7?
Yeah, I think he is falling a little bit more than he probably should be. Like I think still has plenty of upside available. And I wonder if part of that's because he's been hurt the past 2 years. And so we just haven't seen him. And I wonder if folks are starting to worry that between the age and the rash of injuries that he might start to drop off. The thing is, like, he's still a great player. I think, maybe you want to track how he's recovering from that injury, but it was a fluky injury, right? It wasn't like one of these non-contact hamstring injuries, right? Like those are the types of injuries that start to scare me about players when they're consistently missing time because their hamstring is just not cooperating. And it's a big issue within the NFL. Like it's something that NFL teams are really wanting to figure out how to deal with hamstrings. But for Mark Andrews, he had kind of a weird fluky injury from a hip drop tackle that's now quote unquote illegal in the NFL. And so I don't feel like that's the type of injury risk that scares me off from a player. So he very much is a value to me right now, particularly given the nature of that offense and how I think they're going to be more balanced this year, which means that they can get Mark Andrews more open in passing routes.
Jayson, you have an interesting build. And again, I don't always have you guys talk about your teams, but this kind of leads into the Mark Andrews question. You chose Travis Kelce, the oldest and best tight end in the NFL, over Kyle Pitts, who is the mystery box. Let's be perfectly clear. But I find it interesting, Kelce over Mark Andrews. I'm a big Kelce guy, but man, that would be a hard debate for me. Was there any consideration of Mark Andrews with that pick, or did you know because of the fact that you land Sam Laporta, you just wanted to pair him with Travis Kelce?
No, I had to think on that one pretty good. And I did really debate whether to go with Kelce there. My decision there was kind of, what I like to do in these startup drafts is as I get to like the 5th, 6th round, I reassess what is this team that I'm building now. I told you I don't like to go in with a strategy or a plan per se, but once it's kind of down on paper, I go, okay, am I a veteran team? Am I a win now team?
Yeah.
I take value up until that point, and then I kind of reassess and go, where are we headed? And my feeling was, okay, I have enough to compete now. After those 5 or 6 rounds were in the book, and so I want the best tight end for this year and maybe for the next 2 years, perhaps. So I'm getting Kelce, and if he goes into the ground with my team, then so be it. But I've made the decision at that point to pivot into a contending roster versus a hopeful roster.
Let me tell you, 2 years ago, I said that you would have to kill Travis Kelce off of my roster. And then I had him on some really bad teams and I decided to trade him away. One of them was infamously one of the worst trades I've ever made, where I didn't even think to ask for draft picks back. I got really, really high on George Pickens. So I traded Travis Kelce now this kind of worked out. I traded Travis Kelce for George Pickens, Khalil Herbert, but I also got David Njoku back. So I'm not like extremely mad. And if George Pickens becomes this year what we think he is, it's not the worst trade. It's gotten better with time. It's like fine wine.
Yep.
But I do find that interesting is you said if he dies on my roster, he dies on my. That's exactly how I feel about Travis Kelce at this point. I'm not going to move him. But Jayson, the next tight end who's in a similar situation, and Austin, you hit on this perfectly, that people might be overreacting to the Mark Andrews injury. I think the dynasty community is overreacting on the TJ Hockenson injury. TJ Hockenson, after what seemed really, really good, I think it was last year going over to Minnesota, some people moved him up to their tight end 1 because of age, Jayson. He obviously has a pretty bad knee injury, but he's still 26 years old, and this is dynasty. I feel like redraft brain is creeping in. He's the tight end 8 versus ADP, and he went into the tight end 10 in this draft. Is the dynasty community freaking out too much about this TJ Hockenson injury, Jayson?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the injury being late in the season. I do agree with you that there's some bleed over from a redraft mindset. And I also think it's the turnover with Cousins leaving town in Minnesota. So people are maybe not into JJ McCarthy as much, or not sure what that offense is going to be going forward. But I just think they have too many weapons there. I mean, if McCarthy doesn't work out, they're going back to the well. They're going to get a quarterback there. And to your point, Hockenson has a lot of talent and he has age on his side. So I think he's being undervalued as well, especially if you look at this draft board.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Austin, I'm actually going to highlight Odunze's team. We don't always talk about a specific team early on, but Odunze has once again, I feel like this was Odunze last week, who took all the players that I decided I wanted to talk about. So he starts off with the 2 quarterbacks, goes wide receiver heavy, but then very interestingly, Austin gets Brock Bowers, arguably the most interesting tight end in fantasy drafts this year, Mark Andrews, who we said could be a value, and then 2 picks later, TJ Hockenson, who could be a value. How do we feel specifically about Hockenson, but then Odunze's build in general?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it, honestly. I mean, there's actually a really interesting balance here of building to win now and building young. Like, there's a scenario where Anthony Richardson plays all 17. We're still at 17 games, not for long. There's a chance that Anthony Richardson plays all 17 games this year, and if that happens, then this roster is constructed in a way that could be really interesting out the gate, but also you have plenty of youth. I think similar to what you were just saying with TJ Hockenson, like, he might not be that great this year until like the end of the year, and even then may struggle to come back a little bit just because of the nature of ACL injuries. But next year and moving forward, he's got a chance to be a consistent top 5 fantasy tight end. So this roster build is really solid from that perspective. The only thing that I'm concerned about is if people start taking running backs, Odunze might be in a world of hurt, because there are some good running backs still out there. But if those start flying off the board, then this can get risky. But so far, I'm loving it.
Yeah, and folks, if you've just turned into the show for the first time, I will scroll the draft in a bit. We'll talk some more about the later picks, but I want you guys to be able to see the top picks while we talk about everything else. And the next question was supposed to be my first question, but of course, tight ends jump in there and take over, even though it's a Superflex draft. But guess what? We're not talking about Superflex quarterbacks either. There's been a lot of big 3 talk. Typically, it's about rap beef recently, and when it comes to Dynasty, I think there's a big 3 wide receivers, Jayson. CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. They went that way in this draft. They are the only wide receivers taken in the first round. They were taken all back to back to back. So my question to you is, do you look at them as a big 3? Do they belong in the first round of a Superflex draft? And are there any other wide receivers you might put in that conversation, Jayson?
I would say yes. I do look at them as kind of the big 3. I do think that there's at least an argument to be made for them to all go in the first round. You have to it depends on what your draft board looks like. It's hard to say. Like, again, I hesitate to say they have to be in that. If there's value there to be had, take it. And then as far as guys that might belong in that kind of pantheon, I already told you I'm an Eagles fan, so this is a homer, and you can see it on my draft board. But
you're the first person to bring his name up, though, because the other 2 names that at least Austin's going to mention.
Right.
I've heard mentioned, but you're the first to bring up AJ Brown.
Okay, so I'll say AJ Brown. I know he's got competition for targets just because of the skill position players in Philadelphia. But he's only 26 years old. So when you talk about age, he's not at an elevated age. He's got the security of a long-term deal with Philadelphia, so he knows he's going to stay there. He has good chemistry with Jalen Hurts, who they're hoping to kind of rebound and rehabilitate after a down year last year. And there's a new offensive coordinator in town in Kellen Moore that knows how to use his receiving core to their max. So I think really the sky's the limit for him. And I think if you look at his history, he's been 1,000-yard receiver pretty consistently throughout his career, and especially he's been in that elite category since his move to Philadelphia.
Austin brought this up in the private chat a while ago, and it's probably time for me to say it, though he mentioned it 20 minutes ago. If you happen to be watching us on Twitter, Josh has been kind enough to include the YouTube link. Jump over there, hit the follow button, subscribe. We'll actually get your comments a little bit better. I think I read that StreamYard is having some trouble with Twitter today. So if you have questions about this draft or your draft or any questions in general, you should hop over onto YouTube. You should go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We just recently crossed 1,000 followers. Let us know in the comments if you got an ad before this video. I've been asking for 3 weeks. We still haven't gotten any ads. I want to start making some money off of this shit, people. So let me know if you got an ad. I want to see how that works out. Austin, back to you with the big 3. You obviously took Justin Jefferson first, so you're at least bought into 1/3 of the big 3. Are these guys all in the same tier, and does anybody else belong in that tier?
Yeah, I was gonna say if I was in on CD Lamb, there was a great pun opportunity here for me to see. It's just the big C D Lamb, but going off of your rap reference, but I do actually have.
I should have had you guys compare these 3 to J. Cole, Drake, and Kendrick Lamar, but that's not the vibe of our show for the most part. Sorry, Austin.
That is a fascinating. I'm gonna have to think about that.
I might save that for later in the season.
I was gonna say you might need to prep me for that because I'm gonna have to really get in the weeds on this. But no, Justin Jefferson is definitely the number 1 to me still. I feel like he's the debate between him and CeeDee Lamb is somewhat in part to the fact that Justin Jefferson missed a decent amount of last season. Like I get CeeDee Lamb was getting a ton of targets, and I don't see why that's gonna fade. But Justin Jefferson is just so good, and I feel like if McCarthy is anything close to Kirk Cousins, that's going to be enough to just allow Justin Jefferson to continue to be consistently the dominant number 1 receiver in fantasy leagues. But I will say, if there's anybody in the big 3 that I'm a little bit on the fence about, it's honestly Jamar Chase. There's part of me that's like, if I were to kick somebody out of the big 3, it would be Chase. And I think there's a case for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm a little bit less sold on the case for AJ Brown, but I like that take. The one that I'm going to be interested in by the end of this year is to see where does Marvin Harrison play in this big 3, because he has been seen as the best prospect in many, many years. So I am very curious to see after his rookie season, does he break into that big 3?
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's the other name I expected you to bring up. We're going to pivot over to running backs, guys. And Austin, it's time for Keep Trade Cut. I was trying to figure this question out because I've been meaning to talk about these guys for ages, and this is a great opportunity for you to talk about all 3 of them. There are 3 older running backs in new places this year, and their ADP is wildly different. If I looked at the draft board correctly, I think they're all separated by 2 rounds, but I just want you to talk about them as players. And that is Saquon Barkley, who moved to the Philadelphia Eagles, Josh Jacobs, who moved to the Green Bay Packers, and DeAndre Swift, who moved to the Chicago Bears. I'm going to have you keep trade cut these guys, and then after your answer, I'm going to remind you about their ages in case you don't know them off the top of your head, because I think your answer could be interesting. So anyway, keep trade cut. Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, Austin.
Oh boy, I don't like this one, and for a different reason than I typically don't like these. Typically, I don't like these because there's one player that I love them all, and I'm like, how can I cut one of these? Frankly, I don't know that I want to keep any of these guys right now. But if you're forcing my hand, boy, I think I'm gonna have to keep Saquon Barkley because I love his situation. I really love his situation with that incredible offensive line in Philadelphia. It's hard to kind of argue with that. I don't even know who I want to pick at this point. This is the thing that gets tough about dynasty drafts, is it gets down bad really quickly. So Saquon Barkley, I will keep. I'm gonna trade Josh Jacobs, I guess. I think people like him more than they like DeAndre Swift. So that seems like it's fitting. And then I'm going to cut DeAndre Swift. That running back room is so crowded in Chicago. They have 4 guys that I feel like could easily like get 10 touches on any given Sunday. So it's too crowded of a room for me to feel comfortable with really any of them except for in best ball settings. So yeah, that's where I'm going. Keep Saquon Barkley, trade Josh Jacobs, cut DeAndre Swift.
Jayson, any difference in your answer there?
Yeah, I think I have a similar mindset, but maybe a different answer. I would probably I'll say keep Josh Jacobs. I don't think he has the same cachet with people, the name, and especially the uncertainty in Green Bay. But I do think there's a huge role for him there, especially given the departure of Aaron Jones. I think he's going to do just fine there. I'll trade Saquon just because I think he's got the biggest name and will probably reap me the biggest return in terms of a trade, and I'll cut DeAndre Swift. And the only reason I say cut DeAndre Swift is not a talent issue, just like Austin said. I like him as a running back. I do feel he's somewhat limited in terms of I don't want to say he's a third down back because I think he's more than that, but he's slight of frame. And I think, the Eagles used him in such a way last year where they were very cautious about him taking too many hits. And even when he was hot, you'd see him get pulled out of the game. And given the mess, I guess I'll say, of that running back depth chart in Chicago, I can definitely foresee that kind of being his outcome there as well, where the coaches are going to say, okay, great 25-yard run. Now come out for 15 snaps while we get in, Khalil Herbert and all these other guys that we have floating around here. And I don't know that there's going to be anywhere that you can really depend on. So I'll cut him.
So, Jayson, I agree with your answer for the exact same reason. I think the trade value is higher when it comes to Saquon Barkley. And if you're looking for a trade value and trade calculator, make sure you guys check out Dynasty Nerds, one of the great tools with their subscription, 15% off if you use promo code CLUBFANTASY. It is on the ticker along the bottom. But the thing I wanted to point out with this question, guys, is I don't want people to freak out about a running back ages, because these guys both just told you to cut the youngest running back of this group. DeAndre Swift is 25 years old. And then Saquon Barkley, who both kind of agreed probably has the most value. Austin wants him on his team. Jayson wants to trade him away. He's the oldest of this group. So don't panic too much when it comes to ages, because the value could be with the older running back. And that is exactly why I wanted to ask this question. We're going to have you guys do a draft recap here in a little bit. We're going to talk about some players who maybe haven't been picked yet that you guys will look for in the later rounds. But the last question I'm going to ask you guys is about some of these younger rookie running backs who all should be going in the second half of this draft. I'm going to try to find them real quick, but I'll just mention their names. Some of them may not even have went yet. Are you guys concerned? There was already concern about the rookie running backs in this draft, and the concern was the talent level. But then 3 of them who were the higher rated rookies also ended up behind more established backs. So in a startup, are you guys concerned about waiting for Trey Benson, Jaylen Wright, and Marshawn Lloyd to win their jobs, Austin?
Yeah, I think that they're great values right now. I'm not concerned about taking them. I think their situations are all a little bit different, but there's a common theme between all of them in that some of the running backs in front of them are older running backs that are also starting to get some wear and tear on their bodies and might face injury issues. So I think the best example is Trey Benson. He clearly has a path to taking over that role at some point in the season, because Josh Jacobs has never had a season where he played every game. Like, just that's not his style, and it's totally fine. He's still a great player when he's on the field, but there's a chance that he's going to be off the field. Just
clarifying, James Conner has never played every game. You said Josh Jacobs, and that's who you're going to talk about next, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you. You. James Conner did it again. James Conner has never played a full season. Josh Jacobs has had a ton of touches the past 2 seasons. And so that does concern me for wear and tear for him. So I actually think there's a chance that Marshawn Lloyd is on the field at the gate to kind of manage Josh Jacobs' load. And then also, if they do keep running Josh Jacobs the way that he has been run the past 2 years, I think the injury risk continues to be high, which keeps Marshawn Lloyd in there. And then Jaylen Wright, I like him more so from a best ball perspective right now because of the nature of that Miami offense, but it's a similar deal. We saw almost all of those Miami running backs get hurt at some point last season. Raheem Mostert missed time. Devon Achane, even though he's young, missed some time. The other guy that I'm forgetting that everybody used to love sometimes. So he's got a chance to be like the number one running back just because the nature of the way they play, there's injuries are a big possibility in that offense.
And Jayson, looking at this draft, Marshawn Lloyd hasn't even been drafted. Jaylen Wright got drafted while we were talking about him. And it occurs to me, Blake Corum is also in that situation. And he went before both of the other two guys that I did mention. So basically, same question. Do you have a concern on waiting on these guys? But I'm going to throw in for you. Are you a little shocked that Kendry Miller went ahead of Jaylen Wright and Marshawn Lloyd?
Yeah, I didn't see that Miller pick, coming.
Yeah, that one threw me off too.
On the running back class as a whole, I think maybe dynasty players in particular have gotten kind of spoiled in recent years where these rookies are coming out and getting dealt immediately into starting roles or into prominent roles. And I think you're going to have to exercise some patience with this class. I do think that this is a talented class, but I think the teams, especially when you talk about like Miami's a great example. They've got Mostert. He was huge for them last year. People tend to get excited about the new rookies and the excitement of, oh, Wright's going to be there and he's great and he's this. If they know what to expect out of Mostert, they're going to keep funneling him the ball until he's injured. Or as Austin said, there's some other outside influence that forces these guys to miss time. They're not going to just vault up to the top of their depth charts, respectively, just because they're new and they're sexy. Because head coaches don't manage their teams like dynasty managers do. They tend to go with the guy that's got pass pro ability, that has the reliability, has been in a system. All of the other, kind of hackneyed things that people get bored with, but that's reality. So just don't take any of those guys with the expectation that they're going to walk in day one and be a star.
Yeah, certainly Marshawn Lloyd seems to be falling way further than I would expect him to. Again, the previous prior thoughts on these players is carrying over to these drafts right now, which kind of brings me to the last user question before I have you guys redraft. Tyler wonders, is there anybody who would draft Odunze over Nabers due to the better quarterback situation? And Austin, I'm going to have you start with this because a year ago you were a Daniel Jones defender. I can't imagine you're still in that camp at this point. In Dynasty, does Odunze belong over Nabers, or is that just a bridge too far? They went almost exactly a full round apart from each other earlier in this draft.
So what if I told you I'm actually a little bit higher on Daniel Jones than you might think?
Oh, we're going to have so much fun this summer. So much fun.
I mean, I do think that Daniel Jones, he's not Josh Allen. He's never going to be Josh Allen. I do think that part of the issue with that offense last year was the offensive line. And I think that if they can improve the offensive line and stay healthy, then there's a great chance for Malik Nabers to do well because Daniel Jones will have the time in the pocket to actually get the ball to him. I still would probably take Nabers over Odunze because if in the situation, like if we're saying that Daniel Jones is not a starting NFL quarterback and he's going to get replaced next year, well, that's a similar timeline to where I think Odunze would actually get the amount of volume he would need to pay off at that ADP, right? Because Odunze is still buried behind DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. So if you're saying both of these players really have to wait until their sophomore season to do well, I'm going to actually then take the player that I just think is better because I think it's more if they get a quarterback upgrade in New York, then that's going to benefit Nabers and he will take off from there.
Makes a lot of sense. And Jayson, did you have Nabers ahead of Odunze, and did that switch with landing spot for you?
I did have Nabers ahead of Odunze. I kind of feel like I'm still in that boat for a lot of the reasons that Austin just kind of listed out there. It's the classic, dynasty debate, the talent versus the situation. That's been argued from time immemorial. There's arguments on both sides of that debate. I just feel like Nabers is just that talented that he's going to persist through whatever quarterback situation he's in New York and beyond. So I'm totally comfortable with going with Nabers and playing the long game there.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Guys, I like to make sure this show ends in an hour, so I'm going to start with your draft recaps. And Jayson, you finished first, so I'm going to have you go first, and we'll have Austin go second. You do not need to talk about every player you drafted. You can talk about who you want to talk about if it's someone you haven't talked about yet, or any things you found interesting about draft strategy if you needed to pivot at any point in this draft. And then at the very end, are there any players that you didn't get a chance to draft that would have fallen to the later rounds that you would be looking for?
So I'll just say, I mean, we kind of talked about the early rounds previously on this broadcast. So,
Yeah.
it started with the double quarterback. I felt comfortable having locked that down in a super flex format. As I've already said, I didn't go into this with a thought of I need to get this position by this round. I just kind of let the talent fall to me. I mean, obviously, we discussed the Laporta pick. I really love that there in the 4th round. I tried to surround him with some receivers with talent, but also youth, and AJ Brown, Metcalf, and Higgins there. For now, I do have a stack there with Burrow and Higgins, which I liked. It remains to be seen whether he'll stay in Cincinnati. I'm dubious that he will. So it's a short bump, but maybe I'll get one this season. I talked about Kelsey, being potentially the number 1 tight end for this season, and I like that. I feel like I can comfortably pop him into a flex spot, and he can give me the same scoring that any receiver in that round might have given me. Then at that point I was pretty late. I didn't have a running back on my roster until the 8th round, which doesn't make me entirely warm and fuzzy. But as Austin mentioned earlier, some of the running backs kind of fell, and I was willing to kind of follow that trend and let them fall. So I started kind of clutching them up there at that point. I got Kamara at 8. Again, he's not exactly on the right side of youthful. He's 28 years old, so he's getting close to that cliff that people are concerned with, but I do feel I can get a good 2 years out of him, and I do think he's going to be leveraged heavily in New Orleans. I get Najee Harris, which it's not sexy, but I think it's reliable. I think
2 rounds after Kamara feels like you took those in the wrong order, but it worked out for
right.
you.
It worked okay. All right, exactly. I do feel he's going to be leaned on heavily in Pittsburgh, and then I kind of buttoned it up with Pollard and Mostert. It was funny. We were talking about Mostert, and I was giving him his flowers just before he fell to me. So I was like, well, I guess I told everybody where I was going here, and nobody was savvy to snipe him from me. So I'm going to just go ahead and grab him. I do think there's plenty of upside with him there in Miami. And this kind of, I told you I don't generally have a draft strategy, but I do have kind of some philosophies that I try to stay true to. And one of them is with running backs in Dynasty. I think of them, I kind of how the NFL thinks of them as disposable. So if I can get a year or 2 out of a running back, and then I just kind of cycle through who's the next guy I can kind of steal a year or 2 from, I'd much rather be youthful in my tight ends, in my receivers. And, I think quarterbacks, we talked about their longevity in the league. They play pretty long. So I'm not too worried about age. When we talked about Dak Prescott, we had that conversation. So age doesn't really factor in as much there for me. But running backs, I don't try to get caught up in the competition of let's get the youngest guy possible. I just, who can give me a year or 2. And I feel like my build here kind of reflects that mindset.
Yeah. I'm not going to have you comment because I need to get Austin in here, but bold strategy ending your draft with 3 Tennessee Titans. That's maybe not the offense everybody thinks to buy into. Austin, you know the deal at this point. You didn't need to talk about everybody. Talk about who you want to talk about.
Yeah, so in some ways I let the value fall to me in this draft. I wanted to see, once I figured the top 6 would be quarterbacks, and I didn't really want to try and reach on a quarterback there. So I went with my anchor receiver and Justin Jefferson. From there, I wanted to see how it worked out with the quarterbacks. I was very curious to see what I was going to be able to do by not going 2 quarterbacks out the gate. Kyler Murray, I kind of reached on him because I really like him in Dynasty right now. And then the second quarterback, I basically kept picking guys that I was like interested in and seeing if they would fall to me, and they kept not. They kept going ahead of ADP. So it was really, you
really mentioned some snipes happening earlier in the draft there. So.
Yeah, the guys I was looking at, I mean, Dak Prescott, I knew that was unlikely. Trevor Lawrence, I wondered how much he would fall because of how people are viewing him. And then Jared Goff was the last one. I was like, come on. And he was almost there, but went to pick before I took DJ Moore. So I ended up getting Drake May and then Matt Stafford in the 11th round, which I really love his value right now. I think he still has a couple of good seasons left in him. So going for a win now strategy, I really enjoy that. And then from there, I'd say the other thing I was really focused on is like, when do I take my running backs? And Bijan Robinson, I took him out of value. Like him being at the 3rd round, that should never happen. I don't care the format. So I had to take him at that point. And then from there, I felt like I could wait a really long time and take that anchor RB strategy to end up with Javonte Williams, David Montgomery, and Austin Eckler. Felt really great on that. Every time we've done one of these this season, I've done something similar where I wait a really long time for running backs, and I have yet to feel bad about the running backs I've come away with. So I was not a 0 RB truther. I'm still not a truther. like I'm not going to scream from the rooftops that you must do it, but it's working right now because of the way people are viewing the running back position. Like you don't have to focus so heavily on running backs in those early rounds unless you're just purposely trying to get different than anyone else. So I love how that happened. And then I still don't get why Jacoby Myers is so far down.
You've been on that for a while now.
How did I get him in the 14th round? He's young. He's good. I know the quarterback situation isn't bad, but hey, they can pass the ball.
Yeah. For the oops of the draft, this is a personal preference thing. This is a guy who I've been on for a while now. Jayden Reed going in the 9th round after Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, who I love, Stephon Diggs. I just feel like Jayden Reed showed something last year and is so young going into his second year. We should not be taking these veteran wide receivers over some of these young guys. And I mean, these older guys went ahead of Jordan Addison, Ladd McConkey. I really think we need to consider the age when it comes to some of these wide receivers. And Jayden Reed specifically is one that I'm trying to land everywhere, letting him fall that far. And to answer the question earlier, I'm not going to get too much into it because I want to get us out of here. When you're looking at value of quarterbacks at the end of a super flex, specifically in redraft, don't be afraid of some of these older quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, who's not old, has been falling. Matt Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. You only need these guys to last 1 year, but people are going to be put off by their ages. So make sure those are the guys you're looking for. Guys, that is the end of the show. Let me get this draft board out of our way here. Jayson, go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you once again.
You can find me on Twitter at Spides78 as listed there. You can also find my written work on dynastynerds.com.
And Austin?
Yeah, you can catch me at Austin_FFL on Twitter and Instagram. And you can get all of my written content at clubfantasyffl.com. Catch us here on YouTube. And then if you are a Carolina Panthers fan and want to follow them, I write for @LastWord on NFL for the Panthers.
Perfect. Guys, thank you to each and everybody who tuned into the show, asked us questions, and specifically to the people who drafted with us. This is a really boring show. If we have a bunch of auto drafters, you guys did absolutely fantastic today. Listen, Club Fantasy goes live 5 times every single week, and it's about to be 6. We have redraft shows, we have dynasty shows, we have best ball shows, we have mock drafts to help you get better at all of those things. We're about to have a brand new mock draft, Mock Girl Summer with Wendy Early and Julia Papworth. So you guys do not want to miss the content that Club Fantasy is putting out. You have literally no reason not to subscribe to our channel. It's absolutely free. We even have a golf DFS show. We have you covered everywhere. Mock drafting will be back on Monday. That's with Gator J and Chris Badistel. They're going to have a great guest. They mock at night. I don't know who they have this week. I don't know what the draft is, but I guarantee it's going to be fantastic. Look for that 10 p.m. Eastern. On Wednesday, we're going to continue with our No Pun Intended series. I did not update my show sheet, so I have no idea what teams we're covering, but every week we are breaking down 3 different teams. We're going to tell you about some of our favorite players, some of our favorite bets that you can make. It's going to be a great show with a great guest. I just did terrible in getting my notes set up, but you guys don't need to worry about that, and I need to get these guys out of here. So always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you at the next mock draft.